Professor Doig, the Port Authority is one of those entities that a lot of people in our region know about, but they don't know much about it. Most people interact with the Port Authority at one time or another. So if you could, let's start with a wide angle. What is the Port Authority's mission, its function, and what kind of benefit does it provide people in our region when it works well?
Well, the Port Authority was created in 1921 because there were real conflicts between the states of New York and New Jersey over how to deal with port and interstate issues. As one of its first projects, built the George Washington Bridge, it then built the Lincoln Tunnel and took over the Holland Tunnel. And so by the early 1940s, it had some active role, really important role, in transportation across the Hudson River and therefore between New York and New Jersey. That turned out to be a first step, and then it went on in order to build the bus terminal, to take over the 3 airports from New York and New Jersey, and in other ways to try to provide a transportation base for improvement and growth in the region's economy.
You mentioned that it was formed in 1921 and you listed some of the major accomplishments of the Port Authority. It sounds like it functioned rather well, at least during the beginning portion of its existence. Would you agree?
Yes, I think it functioned quite well, actually, up until, well, at least well into the 1990s, when you began to get some division in terms of the control of the agency. But until then, it had a group of very responsible and I would say independent commissioners who looked at the region's problems, thought about what the Port Authority could do to help, and therefore came up with some important solutions. And the staff was just crucial in that area. The container port, the first container port in the United States, being constructed in the 1950s and 1960s by the Port Authority. That was based on important staff input, and then the board encouraging it, and the governors being willing to go along. That's the process that by and large was followed from 1921 until well into the 1990s. I guess I would say about 1995.
So, Professor, what happened in the mid-90s, in 1995? Did it become more politicized, and if so, why? And are we able to identify perhaps who was responsible for that change in the effectiveness of the Port Authority?
Yes, I think we can say that in 1995, the significant change was that the governor of New York, who for various reasons was then the most influential person in deciding who should be the chairman of the Port Authority, who should be the executive director, the long-term staff member in charge of the thousands of people, he decided not to bring in a professional, but instead a person who is important to his election on Staten Island. And therefore, this person who came in had no background in transportation, almost none in running an organization. That then led the governor of New Jersey, Governor Whitman, to say that, well, I've got to get an important professional in the transportation field in this agency, and she then named somebody as the deputy executive director. The combination of these two people was, I think, very unfortunate, partly because they reported to different bosses, different loyalties, and partly because their main approach seemed to be to cut things, to get rid of the library, to get rid of the planning department, and in other ways to make the agency less effective in being able to think what transportation changes were needed, what population growth was going to do to various parts of this complex region, and therefore you had an important step toward making political the work of the agency.
Professor, obviously the Port Authority has gotten a lot of attention in recent months because of scandals. We know about the George Washington Bridge scandal. We're learning more about some of the contracts connected to Port Authority Chairman David Sampson, the former chairman, and some of the no-bid contracts that went to people connected to his firm. And we're learning more about some of these issues as the days go on, seemingly. Is it your sense that these scandals were either facilitated by or somehow inevitable because of the politicalization and the sort of sense of political patronage that came with that change in the operation and the functioning of the Port Authority?
Well, I think that change that I described in 1995 was the first step, but then the agency, because it has thousands of very effective employees, continued to function quite well until Chris Christie became governor. Christie decided that the best step he could take for his own reelection plans was to reward those who worked in his campaign, and therefore he inserted, I guess we could say he forced the insertion of 70 to 80 patronage appointees in the agency, something that had never been done before. And those folks, of course, were selected because they helped him politically, but they were not necessarily competent to do the job. So that now you had a lot of not clearly competent people trying to work with those who were long-term and significant experts in the fields. That dampened the morale considerably. And then, of course, a couple of those appointees, David Wildstein and Bill Baroni, finally went over the top in deciding they'd make use of the Port Authority's abilities in order to pay back a mayor who hadn't supported Christie's re-election in the fall of 2013.
There are going to be some viewers, Professor, who hear the names of the three governors you just mentioned, Pataki, Whitman, and Christie, and say, well, he's just blaming Republicans. Have we seen similar appointees, patronage appointees, or non-professional appointments by Democratic governors, perhaps a Cuomo or a Corzine or other Democratic governors over this span?
Yes, there have been some appointees by Democratic governors for sure, who were also patronage appointees, both McGreevey and Corzine in New Jersey, but those tended to be 3 or 4 people, not a large number. I don't think this is a Democratic or Republican thing. There's certainly the willingness of governors and other members of both parties to look for places to put people who've helped them in their campaigns. But it's true that Pataki and Christie have been significant in their desire to use the agency in ways that were not consistent with its founding or with the important work it can do. I would say Governor Cuomo has inserted 3 or 4 people, but only that, and therefore there's a contrast here which relates, I think, not so much to political party, but to how you want to get things done to help the region and your own party.
About the mission of the Port Authority, Professor, has that changed in time? Has it expanded beyond its original mission? I mean, I've heard questions about the management of Stewart Airport in the Hudson Valley and Atlantic City Airport in South Jersey, not in the Port Authority zone, and also the fact that it's become a landlord given the World Trade Center and the building and functioning of the World Trade Center. Is that part of the issue here, that the Port Authority has gone beyond its original mission?
Well, I think there is a lot of discussion about whether the authority's mission has been expanded beyond what it should be. The Stewart Airport is actually a functioning part of the New York, New Jersey region's airport system. Atlantic City Airport is not, and there again, I think we see the hand of Governor Christie in forcing the agency to take action there, even though it's not really relevant to the choices that consumers make in going to airports. As far as the real estate side is concerned, I've never felt it was a good idea for the Port Authority to be so actively involved in the building and now the rebuilding of the World Trade Center. But it's also true, as some of the critics have said, that if the Port Authority can wait over a period of years, the World Trade Center site will generate profits that will be very helpful in meeting the deficits of PATH and of the bus terminal, which are the major deficit areas for the port agency. So it may be that selectively done, some real estate ventures can be justified. I would think, for example, that air rights over the Port Authority bus terminal on 42nd Street might be quite valuable, and I would think that the Port Authority, if they turn out to be worth building, would want to extract the revenues from that effort in order to meet some of the deficits at the bus terminal. There are also some small efforts that have been made, mainly again to help the governors. Governor Mario Cuomo and Governor Christie, one Democrat and one Republican, have both demanded that the agency make some land purchases and activities in small towns that have helped their campaigns or their political efforts. And that kind of mission drift, as they call it, would probably best be eliminated.
Finally, Professor, both Governors Christie and Cuomo are talking about reforming the Port Authority or re-examining the mission of the Port Authority. If there was one single reform or change that you could put in to the Port Authority's administration or operating system, what would that be?
It would be to select commissioners who are willing to stand on their own 2 feet and make decisions in relation to the agency's efforts that connect well with what the region needs. And that set of independent commissioners, and there are several of the commissioners on the Port Authority board now who would qualify, would then make a decision as to who select as chairman and who to select as executive director. And the executive director would be chosen based on a nationwide search, not based on one governor's preference for who should be executive director. So that's a kind of important change, I think, and it would apply to any public agency that wants to get things done. You want independent, effective commissioners, and they should make a selection of staff based on a nationwide search focused on quality, not on political leverage.
Dartmouth Professor Jameson Doig, and also an author of Empire on the Hudson, A History of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. As much of an expert on this matter as anybody out there. Professor, thank you so much for a few minutes.
Thank you.